Lynn Sr., Rita, and Lily were sitting rather anxiously in the lit waiting area of the emergency room. After finding their son curled up on the floor, bruised, beaten, and even trying to nurse his broken arm the best he could, they wasted no time in scooping him up before driving him off to the Royal Woods General. Lily tried to soothe him on the car ride over, but he finally passed out from the pain, prompting the parents to hurry, nearly catching their breath on the attention of the police. It was a few hours since the nurses wheeled him past those double doors. Rita's eyes were still red from crying nonstop. Her husband was comforting her. The pile of used tissues was evident how long it had been going on. Lily hadn't stopped staring at the doors since her older brother was taken through them, wanting nothing more than to be by his side, but even as an infant, she understood that she wasn't allowed back there. "I should have done something. I could have at least intervened before it got out of hand," Rita croaked. "We should have, dear. I wonder what made the girls do this. It's never gotten this bad." "I'm not concerned about the girls, Lynn," the mother stated, getting irritated. "I am worried about us. Since our family has grown and we've done what can we do, but it hasn't been enough. We entrusted them to handle themselves with care, and look at what happened. How could we even call ourselves good parents when we can't even prevent our own daughters from putting our only son in the emergency room?" Her face fell in the hands of this. He couldn't argue with her there. He even did felt like shit, seeing that he hasn't expected his son to be there in such a good amount of time. Lynn Sr. always wanted a son, especially after the consistent line of daughters they had. When Rita was pregnant with Lincoln, he expected it to be another girl, given their history. But as God finally listened to his prayers, they were finally gifted a son, and now his little boy was faced with the possibility of death. Lynn Sr. never got angry with his kids, but he felt so angry at his other 9 daughters, he almost wanted to disown them. Heaven forbid if he actually does. The father was pulled away from his thoughts when a nurse came into doors. "Mr. and Mrs. Loud?" The two acknowledged her. "Your son is out of surgery, but the doctor would like to speak with you." "The surgery?" They both stayed in surprise. The nurse only nodded and beckoned for them to follow. Richard Phillips was known as to be one of the best children doctors in the hospital. He's worked on kids that arrived from small accidents, such as running with scissors, to accidentally run on cars, and he's much throughout his life. It always pained him to see kids in that state. Visits from the Loud family were a bit common, but they were usually just anything serious, such as Lincoln's case surprised him greatly from the amount of injuries he sustained. He looked up from his clipboard, find one of his assistants returning with 2 people, the woman carrying an infant. "Mr. and Mrs. Loud?" they said. "Okay, pleasant to meet you. I'm Dr. Phillips. Now I want to inform you that your son is going to be okay. His condition is stable and he's currently sleeping from the anesthesia given to him." "Oh, thank God," Rita sighed. But then she knew that there's something bad news. How bad is it?" "Well," he then looked at the clipboard again. "Broken left arm, bruised cranium, broken nose, missing teeth. Thankfully those were baby teeth. Damaged eye, bruised pelvis, his arm, etc. were bruised, so he'll be in some pain when it comes to using the bathroom. And lastly, 3 of his ribs were fractured, caused by a little internal bleeding." Richard then let out his information to sink in before continuing. "Now, normally I'm not the one to question this, but how did your son get these injuries? I'm only asking this part of the procedure in the event of the police may ask to be informed." Both parents paled at this. No. The police don't need to get involved," Lynn Sr. said quickly to say. The doctor looked at the 2, expecting an answer. "Thing is, our 9 other daughters, they did this," the father said with regret. Must have been something serious if they were able to cause that amount of damage," Richard stated. The parents agreed, but in reality they knew it wasn't. Can we see him?" Rita finally asked. "Most certainly." The doctor led them down the hall to room 233. Upon reaching the room, the doctor slowly opened the door, and instantly both the parents moved to tears. Lincoln was lying in his bed still asleep. He had medical bandages covering his head and torso, along with a cast on his left arm to keep it straight while it healed. His bruises were still evident, along with swollen cheeks and an eye. However, these were the beginning to heal as well. There was an air tube connected to his nose, along with another tube under his blanket. It was connected to his thing to allow waste fluid to flow out into a container. Rita had her hand over her mouth, fresh tears cropping up again. "Oh my God, my poor baby," she voiced almost a whisper. "Now, we're currently unsure how long it would take before we can release him, but we're estimated a 2-week to a month time from," Richard stated. "Jesus," Lynn Sr. said in sorrow. Looking over, Rita was bent down a little bit next to her son. Lily was on the bed, softly hugging him, with a sad look on her face, small tears rolling down her face. The father took a look soon hardened. He failed to be a good parent so far, and now this was the time to act like one. Back at the scene of the crime, the remaining Loud sisters slowly but surely dispersed around the house. They were still in shock of what had just occurred hours ago, but one thing was fairly certain: fear, guilt, and regret plagued the house like locusts to crop. At first, none of the sisters believed they had it in them to do what they did, thinking it might be some patches of blood on the carpet, further to remind them that this was reality, and that they were going to be in some really deep poo-poo later on. It made each sister reevaluate the relationship they had with their brother. Lori was in her room, a solemn look on her face as she stared out the window. Bobby had been texting her like he usually does, but she was in no mood to speak with her boo-boo bear. All she could think about was how broken her little brother looked. Lincoln could be an annoyance, and the twerp she could call him often, even making fun of him for stupid mistakes. But the more stupid she thought of it, the more they made mistakes. Sure, she's made dumb decisions in the past, but rarely the siblings ever had held her accountable for them. When Lincoln did, almost all of the sisters took a chance to get it on the case. The thought that made her sick, but anytime Lincoln would make a mistake, he would always try to make things right. When he had the sisters held accountable for anything, she can't even remember. Her bed vibrated from another text being received. From Roberto, of course. He was asking if something was wrong due to the lack of replies. She sighed and began writing back to him. Sooner or later, he was going to find out what happened to Lincoln. Better that she'd tell him than his sister. Lenny hadn't stopped crying for the past ordeal since her parents took the young boy away. Lying on the couch, clutching onto the pillows, she was desperately still crying at full blast, part of the couch being soaked in the process. How could someone as sweet as Fashion Diva do something so cruel? Lenny herself didn't even know at the thought that she had an evil twin. But at the end, she thought so. No, she said she was also responsible for the physical abuse that her brother went through. This single thought ran through her head repeatedly, and allowed her to keep crying until she could no longer shed a tear. Like Lori, Luna had been hooed up in her room since the incident. Her face fell onto her knees. Soft tears ran through her eyes while sad, soft music played from her radio. Out of all her sisters, she was hit the hardest. Lincoln was closer to 5 of his sisters, those being herself, Lenny, Lucy, Lana, and Lily. Yet Luna and Lincoln had a bond closer than that. The rockster had always been so close to Lincoln since he was a baby. She could often sing for him whenever he was upset or play with him, and nobody else would. Bloody fucking hell. She even made his first smooch concert to one to remember, and now she just helped brutalizing the only male sibling. If Mick Swagger heard about this, it would outright state that she wasn't worth following in his footsteps, and had to give up rock and roll altogether. Well, may as well he not say that, but that's what Luna sure felt. Luann had been canceling her appointments for future parties because she was considering shutting down funny business altogether. She didn't even know when she would take requests on again, if at all, but the Joker just didn't have it in her to try to be funny. Knowing that her brother is likely in the ICU for the first time in a while, Even make a pun was the last thing on her mind. When Luann told Lincoln her butt out of their fights, part of her wanted him to do so because she didn't want him to be involved in their stupid fights over something trivial. The other half she despised because she thought this would make things worse. Sadly, the latter happened, and now he had paid a price so severe. The comedian gave a frown and a distaste, mainly at herself, all the pranks she pulled on him, and more suspiciously, during the last April Fool's Day, she deliberately told him that if she invited Ronnie Ann over to make him go through all the traps, and set herself up, that would make her alone feel less of a comedian, more of a jerk, who takes on joy and misery of others. But dwelling on the past wouldn't help. Instead, Luann decided to focus on how she could make it up to her brother. After all, she was going to need plenty of laughs to make him feel better. In the backyard, Lynn constantly beating her head on the side of the tree. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," she said to herself. "How could you do that to him? You're so stupid. You're supposed to be the one protecting him. And yet you went ahead and broke his arm?" The jock slammed her head hard against the bark, no doubting cutting up her forehead a little. Yes, it was Lynn who took a chance to break her brother's arm. Angry tears streamed down her eyes as she continued to vent out her frustration on the giant plant before her. Lynn always liked the roughhouse with Lincoln. She found it fun, although sometimes Lincoln did complain about her going overboard. One would think such a closeness in age, the two might naturally drift each other as playmates. Yet, as always, Lynn always sought out for Lincoln, even when he was in the middle of something he wanted to do, delivering the constant patches to bark. Lynn soon worn herself out and cried loudly in despair, only wanted to take it all back, or at least go back in time where she would stop herself and everyone else. It was apparent that the fights were getting too serious, because she couldn't help but her range check. She physically broke one of her brother more than she ever had. No doubt Lincoln would think of her as nothing but a bully. Lynn always hated bullies, but now she was beginning to realize that she had something become one thing she hated. Lucy was curled up in her bed, crying silently to herself like Luna. She was considered a close sibling to Lincoln, but today that wouldn't be any much further from the truth. What happens today was completely inexcusable, and she now knew the spirits were damning on her for it. Every second she loved Edwin and would refuse to drink a single milliliter of her blood. For the first time in a long time, Lucy allowed herself to show emotion. Her eyes were no longer hidden from her bangs, which were being held by a headband that matched the color of her hair. Her current depressed state was something that she never experienced before. Delving deeper thoughts normally occurred when one goes extremely bouts of stress or have tendencies of taking her own life. She longed for nothing more than to smile Lincoln would usually give when he was happy, although now it would take a miracle for that to happen. In the twins' room, both of them even refused to look at one another. Lola had practically blamed Lincoln for what happened, but Lana was very quick to remind her harshly that it wasn't much their fault in breaking him like anyone else did. After yet another tussle and damaged them, the two depressed girls went to their separate sides and stayed there. Lana couldn't play with her pets, and as the tomboy's words sunk into her twin, Lola refused to even look at herself in the mirror, all because she saw was a monster. She knew she knocked out a few of her brother's teeth, although she was unsure who else did. Looking over at the open closet, all those tiaras, all those gowns, the reason she won so many pageants, it was all due to Lincoln's coaching. Rita was too busy to help. None of the sisters even had any interest in those affairs, yet it was always like her brother, who had helped her when she needed it. He had managed to get Lana to win after all those conceiving to take her place when she broke her leg. In anger, Lola took off her tiara and threw it on the wall, not caring if it shattered on impact. She didn't deserve it to wear it. In a certain little scientist's room, Lisa was working on her chemicals as if nothing happened. But over time, she didn't focus on her work. Her mind kept dwelling back to what Lincoln said before the fight started. Everyone knew that the sister fight protocol, except him. Lisa then slammed her forehead in annoyance. With the discussion of how the protocol were to work, first it began. She didn't include Lincoln normally because he wouldn't get into fights with his sisters. But when she had failed to realize that the whole thing was inconvenienced on him, the same fashion to make it clear for them, she didn't even much as foresee what could occur if Lincoln decided to help his siblings like he usually does. And even worse, she didn't clearly explain to him what happened when this protocol was in effect. Such a dumb move ended up causing a violent fight ever in the house, and now that her brother Lincoln was in the hospital, he didn't help but her in anger. She then stomped her on the family's jewels twice, hoping that he wouldn't have the stability to reproduce. More tears welded up in the scientist's eyes. Not only that she failed her self-proclaimed genius, but she failed as her sister. Sniffling, Lisa rubbed her eyes. "Forgive me, my brother." The house only came alive with noise when everyone heard the sound of Van Zilla pulling into the driveway. Fear gripped on the sisters, knowing whatever punishment their parents would give them would be worse than any grounding they had ever received previously.